Yippee-yi-yi,
Hello, my fellow readers. My name is Greg. This is Ghost Readers in the Sky, and I'm here today with my top 5 picks for Nonfiction November. One of the traditions amongst booktubers is to read nonfiction in November, and I'm going to encourage you to read some nonfiction in November. And to do that, I have 5 of my favorite nonfiction books, and I think there'll be something in here that you will like. So here we go, my top 5 nonfiction picks for Nonfiction November. The first one, Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods, Rediscovering America on the Appalachian Trail. This was written in 1998, and it is Bill Bryson's account of, just as it says, him walking the Appalachian Trail, not as a trained through hiker, not as even a long-term hiker, somebody who's walked around some, but not somebody who's done these kinds of strenuous trips. He sets out to walk the trail with an old friend of his. So you get the narrative of the Appalachian Trail, which is fascinating in and of itself. But he also talks a lot about the people that he meets and the places that he goes through, and has some very nice ancillary essays, related essays on things that happen along the trail. An extensive look at bears and bear attacks on the trail. Stories about the coal mine in Pennsylvania that is on fire and has been on fire for decades and will remain on fire for decades. Really, really fascinating stories, very entertaining, very interesting. I think a really easy book for anybody to slide into, especially if you don't read a lot of nonfiction. If you don't read a lot of personal essay, I think this is a good place to start, because it is so funny. He makes his challenges quite humorous. And so you also are along with him as he is challenging himself, having an adventure. It's a great book. Another personal book, my second book, is one by Patti Smith. It's called Just Kids. The only similarity to Bill Bryson's book is that it's about personal experience, but while Bill Bryson is walking through the Appalachian woods, Patti Smith is moving to New York City, and she does this as, I think she starts in her late teens, if I'm remembering right, but it's about her early days in New York City, meeting the artist community, especially her relationship with the photographer Robert Mapplethorpe, but also Sam Shepard and so many other artists who were in New York at that time. It's the time when she recorded that fantastic album, Horses, which is right at 50 years ago that it was released. Robert Mapplethorpe did the fantastic photo on the cover of that album. While I can relate to the Appalachian Trail, I've never walked the Appalachian Trail, but I have done enough hiking in my life that I can understand the trials and tribulations of walking through the forest. New York City in the 1970s, a foreign experience to me. A kid who grew up out in the American West, fairly rural areas, lots of open space. Reading about New York City in the 70s, it's like a whole different country. And I really enjoyed Patti Smith. I already liked her music, and she just does a fantastic job of writing about her experiences in the artist community of New York in the 70s. Another great book to dive into, especially if you like the music and the art of New York in the 70s. You like the atmosphere and the excitement of that time. Again, very easy to read and very entertaining. Moving on now to books that are more serious. Third book, it's a book from 2018 written by Patrick Radden Keefe. It is called Say Nothing, a true story of murder and memory in Northern Ireland. The title comes from a poem by Seamus Heaney. The line in that poem is, "If you say anything, say nothing." This is about the Troubles in Northern Ireland. Something that I was familiar with, again, growing up out in the American West. In the 80s, I certainly heard about Bobby Sands and his hunger strike, and that was what first alerted me to what was going on in Northern Ireland. And so to see the accounts of what really was going on, all the good and valiant reasons that people were fighting on either side, and seeing all of the horrible things that happened. Keefe does not pull any punches. There are some people who come off a little better in this book, but it's hard to say there are heroes. It filled in a lot of gaps for me. Besides Bobby Sands and Jerry Adams, I don't know that I could have named anybody else involved in this conflict. And he presents a lot of really interesting biographies and the complexity of the various people who were involved, why they did what they did, why they believed what they believed. The idea of murder and memory, I think, is a fantastic subtitle for this book. It is definitely darker and sadder, and it's difficult to read. This infighting in different neighborhoods of the same city in various places in Northern Ireland, particularly in Belfast, is heartbreaking, but it is an extremely informative and I think an important book to look at, to understand conflict, how we get into conflict, and some of the ways we can resolve conflict. Another serious book published in 2019, written by Hallie Rubinold, is The Five, The Untold Lives of the Women Killed by Jack the Ripper. This was an absolutely fascinating work. We know so much about Jack the Ripper, or at least that particular person has been investigated, written about, put into various films and television shows and books and everything else. And yet his victims, the 5 women who he killed, I doubt there's anybody who can name them, or at least that could have named them before Hallie Rubinold's book came out. These were not famous women by any means. Some started off in good families and some didn't. What she does is amazing to me as an historian. She goes into what exists for public records, certainly does some looking at the newspaper accounts, which have a little bit of information, but not a lot. the newspapers were much more interested in the murderer than the person who had been murdered. And going into the public records, so looking at records of births and deaths and marriages and other things of people who entered the poorhouses or the mental institutions, and then being able to say, well, we know that this woman entered this institution at this time, and then she talks about what that might have been like. So it may not be specific to her, but it's very much what would have happened to women in a very similar circumstance in that time. And she does find amazing individual pieces of information, individual scraps of data that can be used to actually put together a story about each one of these women. It is just an amazing book. It's a fantastically done, thoroughly researched. This is a fascinating book, and it is so wonderful to remember the victims of Jack the Ripper instead of celebrating. Celebrating? Yeah, it's kind of what we do, isn't it? Celebrating the murderer. And my fifth book, published in 2018, written by Francisco Cantu. It's called The Line Becomes a River, Dispatches from the Border. This is about a young man who goes into the Border Patrol. He goes in with all the right intentions. But through this book, he talks about the members of the Border Patrol who get corrupted by a corrupt law enforcement system. He also talks about the people who try really hard to avoid that corruption and how he tries to avoid it himself. He talks about the courts and the judges and the people who are not just in charge of the law enforcement, but of making decisions that impact individual people daily. He also talks about a lot of the immigrants who he knows, many of them who came into the U.S. illegally from Mexico. He himself is Hispanic. His mother is also a federal government employee. She worked for the National Park Service for most of her career. And so he's a believer in the federal government. And this is just a fascinating book that details his life on the border as a border agent. He covers a lot of the politics and the policies and what's helpful and what's hurtful and how everybody involved in this is impacted. It's an eye-opening book, I think, and it shows you that this is not just a one-sided issue. There is no simple black and white, good guys, bad guys, white hats, black hats. These are people who are trying to make the best decisions that they can in a difficult circumstance. I thought it was very well done and very much worth reading. So I hope there's something in here that appeals to you, that you might want to try, something you might want to read during Nonfiction November. I would love to hear if you've read any of these and what your thoughts are about them. I'd love to hear if you're planning on reading nonfiction in November and what you're planning to read. All of those comments really inspire me, and I enjoy the I enjoy the back and forth communication that we get to share when you comment, when you like the video, when you subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you enjoyed this look at 5 of my favorite nonfiction books, all of which are worth reading, and I hope you'll explore at least one of them. If not one of these, I hope you explore some nonfiction soon, perhaps during Nonfiction November. Thank you so much, my fellow readers. Till next time, my name is Greg, and this is Ghost Readers in the Sky.